Daniel had always been a man of simple hopes. He woke up early, worked hard on his small farm, and went to bed with the thought that tomorrow would bring something better. Yet life had not been kind to him. The rains had been poor for years, the soil on his land had lost its strength, and prices at the market had dropped so low that sometimes it felt like he was working only to survive. His neighbors often spoke about leaving farming altogether, finding jobs in town or selling what little land they had left. But Daniel was different. He carried in his heart a belief that hard work could change anything. It was this belief that pushed him to attend a small town meeting one Saturday morning, where everything began to change. The town hall was full of chatter. Farmers, traders, and old men sat in wooden chairs while the county official read from a list of abandoned properties. Most people did not even bother to listen. Everyone knew these lands were useless. They were pieces of dry ground no one wanted, left empty for decades. Some even called them cursed. When the official mentioned one particular property at the edge of the valley that was being offered for just $1, laughter broke out. $1, one man chuckled. You'd have to pay me $10 to take that dead land, another added. Not even weeds grow there. Whoever buys it is a fool. Daniel sat quietly, but something about that offer made him curious. $1 was almost nothing. He thought about the wide valley where the land lay, about the old stories of it once being rich with crops, and something in his chest told him this was not just empty ground. It was a chance. When the meeting ended, Daniel walked to the front and asked to see the papers. The official looked surprised, but handed him the document. Daniel's rough fingers ran over the faded map, showing a small square of land with an old shack drawn in the corner. "Are you serious?" the official asked, half smiling. Daniel nodded. He counted out 4 coins, placed them on the desk, and signed his name. Just like that, the land was his. People shook their heads as he left, some whispering that Daniel had lost his mind. But he ignored them. For the first time in months, he felt a spark of hope. The next morning, Daniel drove out to see what he had bought. His old truck rattled along the dirt road, each bump reminding him how far the property was from town. Finally, he reached a broken gate leaning sideways, almost swallowed by weeds. He parked and stepped out. Before him stretched dry soil, patches of wild grass, and silence so deep he could hear the wind whistle across the field. The shack stood, in the middle, leaning like an old man ready to collapse. Its roof had holes. The door hung crooked and the windows were dark. To anyone else it looked like nothing but trouble. But to Daniel it was a beginning. As he walked through the field, he bent down to touch the soil. It was hard, yes, but he noticed it still held some life when he pressed deeper. He thought about water, about digging a well, about planting trees that could break the wind. Ideas filled his mind faster than doubt could enter. He walked toward the shack, his boots crunching on dry twigs. Standing at the door, he pushed it open, and it groaned loudly. Inside, dust floated in the sunlight that came through a broken roof. The air smelled of wood rot and ashes, as if someone had once lit a fire there. Daniel coughed, waving the dust away, and began to look around. The place was nearly empty except for a broken chair, an old blanket, and a pile of tin cans in the corner. For a moment he paused. The cans looked too clean to have been left decades ago. He leaned closer and touched them. They were recent, maybe months old. His eyes narrowed as he looked around more carefully. On the dirt floor, faint footprints appeared in the dust, small and light. Daniel frowned. Could someone still be living here? He stepped back, a chill running through him. But after a moment he shrugged it off. Maybe wanderers or children had come here. It was nothing to worry about, he thought. Still, something about the silence felt heavier than before. That night, Daniel decided to camp on the land. He set up a small fire outside the shack, roasted a piece of bread, and drank from his water bottle. The stars above the valley looked brighter than they ever did near town. He felt a strange peace, as if he belonged here already. But just as he was about to sleep, he heard it, a soft rustling from inside the shack. At first he thought it was the wind. Then he heard it again, like careful steps. He grabbed his lantern and pushed the door open. What he saw made him freeze. In the corner, crouched low against the wall, was a woman. Her hair was long and dark, falling over her thin shoulders. Her eyes, wide and sharp, glowed in the lantern light with both fear and strength. She clutched a torn blanket around her body, as if it was her only shield. Daniel's breath caught in his chest. She was no ghost, no thief. She was real, and she looked half-starved. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, like a frightened deer, she tried to stand and run, but her legs shook and she nearly fell. Daniel reached out instinctively, but she pulled back, her eyes warning him not to come closer. I didn't know anyone was here," Daniel said softly, lowering the lantern so the light wouldn't blind her. His voice carried no anger, only surprise. The woman's lips trembled as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. Finally, she whispered a word, her voice so weak he almost missed it. "No." She shook her head, as if begging him not to drive her away. Daniel felt a sharp ache in his chest. Whoever she was, she had been living here in silence, hidden away from the world with nothing but scraps to survive. His eyes went to the cans in the corner, then back to her hollow cheeks. She must have been starving. Daniel slowly reached into his bag and pulled out the bread he had saved from dinner. He held it out, keeping his distance. At first she did not move. Her eyes flickered between his face and the bread, as if weighing whether it was safe. Then, with trembling hands, she reached out and took it. She ate in small bites, each one, careful, as if she didn't want to show her hunger too openly. Daniel stood quietly, watching, trying to understand who she was and why she was here. In that silent shack under the valley stars, a bond neither of them had expected began to form. Daniel realized this land he had bought for $1 was not abandoned after all. It held a secret, a life hidden in its broken walls. And this discovery was only the beginning of a story that would change both of their lives forever. Daniel hardly slept that night. Even though he lay near his campfire, the image of the woman inside the shack stayed in his mind. He had come to see his new land, dreaming of fields and crops, but instead he had found a starving woman hiding like a shadow. Who was she? Why was she living there? He turned over these questions again and again, staring up at the stars until morning light touched the valley. At dawn, he carefully stepped back into the shack. The woman was still there, sitting against the wall, holding the blanket around her like a shield. Her eyes followed his every move. Daniel spoke gently. "I won't hurt you. You can stay here if you want. I only came to fix the land." She said nothing. He placed a small bundle of food on the floor, an apple, a piece of bread, and some water, and walked out. He didn't wait for her to answer. He wanted her to know she had a choice, not a command. Later, when he peeked in again, the food was gone. The blanket still covered her body, but her eyes no longer carried the same sharp fear. Something had shifted, even if only slightly. Over the next few days, Daniel returned again and again. Each time he brought small things, food, water, matches, or even a clean piece of cloth. Sometimes she ate in silence while he fixed the roof or cleared weeds outside. Other times she stayed hidden, watching him from the shadow of the shack. He noticed how thin she was, her arms almost fragile, her face drawn from hunger. Yet he also noticed something else, strength in her eyes, the kind that comes from surviving what others could not. Finally, one evening when Daniel came with a bowl of warm soup, the woman spoke. Her voice was quiet and unsure, but clear enough. "Why you help me?" she asked. Daniel stopped, surprised. He had not expected her to speak first. "Because you need it," he replied simply. She stared at him, searching his face as if trying to decide if he was telling the truth. After a long pause, she said softly, "My name, Nayeli." Daniel nodded. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Daniel." It was the first time they exchanged names, and though it was a small moment, Daniel felt something important had begun. Nayeli still guarded herself, but slowly, piece by piece, her story began to unfold. She explained that she was Apache. Her family had once lived near these lands before they were forced away. She had stayed behind, unable to let go of the place where her ancestors had walked, hunted, and farmed. Life had been cruel. Jobs were scarce, prejudice was heavy, and she had nowhere else to go. The shack, broken as it was, had been her only shelter. She lived on scraps, wild berries, and the few cans she could gather from nearby towns when no one noticed. Daniel listened quietly. He did not interrupt, did not judge. He simply let her speak. And the more she spoke, the more he realized how much pain she carried. Yet even through her suffering, there was pride. She had not begged. She had endured. Days turned into weeks, and a rhythm formed between them. Daniel would work on the land during the day, clearing rocks and fixing the fence, while Nayeli slowly grew strong again on the food he brought. Sometimes she would come outside, watching him as he worked. One afternoon, she surprised him by walking into the field and pointing to the ground. "Here," she said, kneeling. "Soil's still good. Plant beans. They grow." Daniel bent down beside her, pressing the earth between his fingers. She was right, the soil there was softer, richer. He looked at her in amazement. "You know this land?" he asked. She nodded. "My people. We lived here. We knew its heart." From that day on, Nayeli became more than just a hidden figure in the shack. She began guiding him, showing him where to dig for water, which plants could survive in the valley, and how to use wild herbs for medicine. Daniel was humbled. He had thought he was buying dead ground for $1, but Nayeli revealed that the land still held secrets. Secrets only someone with deep roots could know. Their conversations remained simple at first. She spoke in short sentences, sometimes pausing to find the right English words, but Daniel never rushed her. He listened with patience, giving her space. In return, she began to trust him. One evening as they sat by the fire, Nayeli shared a piece of her past. Her parents had been forced off the land when she was a child, told they could no longer live there. Many left to find work, but she had returned years later, hoping to feel close to her ancestors. The shack was all she found. She had stayed, holding on to memory even when her body suffered. Daniel felt a heavy sadness listening to her, yet also deep respect. She had more courage than anyone he had ever known. Not everyone would understand, though. Daniel knew the town had strong opinions. People still carried old prejudices against Apache families, and if they discovered Nayeli living there, they might drive her out, or worse. So Daniel kept her presence quiet. He did not tell a soul. In the evenings, when he returned to town for supplies, he simply said he was fixing up his land. Some laughed at him, saying it was a waste of time. He only smiled, keeping the truth hidden. One morning, Daniel found Nayeli outside the shack, carefully planting seeds in the soil she had chosen. She moved slowly, pressing the earth with delicate care, almost like a prayer. He joined her, kneeling beside her. Together they planted row after row. "Why do this with me?" Daniel asked, curious. Nayeli looked at him and said, "Because land needs two hands. One cannot wake it alone." Her words stayed with him. Daniel realized this was no longer only about his dream. It was about hers, too. The land was not just a farm. It was memory, history, and a chance for both of them to begin again. At night, as the moon lit the valley, Daniel sometimes thought about how strange fate was. He had come here because of a $1 purchase, chasing hope. Instead, he had found a woman who had been starving in silence. Now she was teaching him, guiding him, and together they were breathing life back into forgotten soil. The valley was no longer silent. It carried the sound of two lives slowly weaving together, step by step, into something stronger. And though Daniel did not yet know it, this was only the beginning of a journey that would change not only the land, but also his own heart forever. Daniel and Nayeli grew closer as the days passed. The quiet valley, once empty and still, now echoed with the sounds of their work. Each morning, Daniel would wake before sunrise, pack a small breakfast, and walk out to the land, knowing that Nayeli would already be outside, tending the small plants she had started in secret. Her hands, though thin and scarred from past hardships, moved with skill and care, planting seeds and clearing weeds in a rhythm that seemed almost like a song of the earth itself. Daniel watched her, admiring the way she knew the land, the way she understood its secret needs. For someone who had been alone for so long, she carried herself with a quiet dignity, and Daniel felt honored to share in her knowledge. They began to speak more openly now. Nayeli, once silent and reserved, told Daniel about the world beyond the valley, the hardships she had faced, the towns that had turned her away, and the few people who had shown her kindness along the way. She spoke in soft tones, careful not to reveal too much at once. Daniel listened without judgment, his heart filling with compassion. He learned that Nayeli's family had been forced to leave the valley many years ago, when policies changed and land was taken from the Apache people. Her parents had gone far away, seeking work and shelter wherever they could. But Nayeli had returned, unable to let go of the land that held her family's history. The shack she had called home was all that remained of that past, and she had clung to it, surviving on scraps and wild plants, waiting for something or someone to help her heal. Daniel found himself thinking about her constantly. He thought about her courage, her wisdom, and her resilience. While he had come to the valley seeking opportunity, he realized he had found something far more valuable, a person who had seen the world's cruelty and yet remained strong, who could teach him not only about the land but about patience, endurance, and hope. Together, they began to imagine a future for the abandoned property. Daniel had ideas for crops and irrigation, but Nayeli suggested things he had never considered: planting certain beans that would enrich the soil, building small barriers to keep water in during dry spells, and even creating a small garden with wild herbs that could be used for medicine. He listened, eager to learn, and slowly began to trust her instincts completely. One morning, as they worked side by side, Daniel noticed how frail Nayeli still appeared. She had gained a little weight from the food he had been bringing, but her shoulders were still thin and her movements were careful, almost cautious. He realized that while she had survived, she had done so at great cost. He offered to build a new cabin for her, a place where she could live comfortably and safely. At first, Nayeli hesitated. Pride, he realized, was part of her nature. She had survived on her own for so long that the thought of accepting help made her uneasy. But Daniel persisted gently, explaining that the shack could not protect her from the harsh winters or from illness. Finally, she agreed, and they began planning together. The work on the new cabin brought them even closer. They measured the walls, gathered wood from nearby forests, and cleared stones from the land. Daniel learned quickly that Nayeli had a deep connection to the earth. She could tell where the strongest soil lay, where roots had run too deep, and where rocks were best left undisturbed. Daniel marveled at her intuition. It was as if the land spoke to her and she listened. As they worked, they spoke of small things, memories of the valley, stories of Daniel's childhood, and fragments of Nayeli's past. Laughter began to return to the valley, soft at first, then more frequent, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. Neighbors began to notice the changes too. At first they only saw Daniel, a solitary figure moving through the valley, but soon they glimpsed Nayeli tending plants with skill and grace. Whispers traveled through the town. "Who is that woman with him?" people asked. "Does she belong here?" Daniel ignored the gossip. He knew that Nayeli had earned her place on the land, just as much as he had. He admired her patience and her quiet determination to remain dignified despite the world's judgment. Over time, he realized that their bond went beyond simple friendship or shared labor. They had begun to rely on each other, each filling gaps in the other's life that had long been empty. One afternoon, while they worked in the field, a sudden rainstorm swept across the valley. The sky darkened and wind whipped through the trees. Daniel and Nayeli rushed to cover the young plants, but the rain was relentless. Soaked to the bone, they laughed at their own helplessness, finding joy in the simple act of struggling together. After the storm passed, the valley smelled of wet earth and new growth. Daniel watched Nayeli kneel in the soil, pressing seeds carefully into the damp ground. In that moment, he realized that this partnership was more than survival. It was creation. Together, they were breathing life back into the land, and in doing so, they were healing pieces of themselves. At night, sitting by the fire inside the half-finished cabin, they shared stories under the flickering light. Nayeli told Daniel about her ancestors, about traditions and celebrations he had never known existed. She spoke of the songs sung around the fire, the dances performed in honor of the seasons, and the ways her people had lived in harmony with the valley long before it was abandoned. Daniel listened, captivated, imagining the life that had once filled these hills. He realized that through Nayeli, he was learning not just about farming, but about history, culture, and respect for the land in ways he had never considered. She had given him a gift that no amount of money could buy. As the weeks turned into months, their work began to show results. Sprouts pushed through the soil, fences stood upright, and the outline of the new cabin began to take shape. Daniel felt a sense of pride he had never known. It was not just his pride, but theirs, a shared pride born of effort, trust, and vision. Nayeli, once a hidden figure surviving alone, now moved through the fields with purpose, teaching, guiding, and laughing. She had found strength again, and in helping her, Daniel had found something he had been missing all his life, a connection deeper than work or family or survival. Yet they both knew challenges lay ahead. The valley had been quiet for a reason, and not everyone would understand their bond or the changes they were making. Still, they faced each day together, learning from one another, growing stronger in ways neither had imagined. Daniel often thought about how a simple $1 purchase had led to this, an abandoned land that held secrets, a woman who had survived against the odds, and a future they were building together, piece by piece. And though the story was far from over, Daniel and Nayeli had already discovered something precious: hope, partnership, and the quiet magic of two people bringing life back to a forgotten place. Daniel and Nayeli worked tirelessly as the weeks turned into months. The valley that had once seemed empty and forgotten began to hum with quiet life. The shack that had once sheltered Nayeli was slowly replaced with a small, sturdy cabin. They worked together from sunrise to sunset, sharing meals cooked over a fire, swapping stories, and learning from each other. Daniel realized that the land was no longer just a dollar investment. It had become a home, a place of purpose, and a connection that neither of them had expected. As they cleared the fields, Daniel noticed how intuitive Nayeli was about the land. She could tell where water still ran beneath the soil, where roots had been planted generations ago, and which spots were best for crops. Daniel tried to keep up, but often she would quietly show him the right way, bending down, touching the earth, and explaining her choices in simple words. Daniel marveled at her knowledge. This was not just survival skill. This was wisdom born from years of living close to the land, understanding its rhythms, and respecting its power. Slowly, he began to trust her instincts even more than his own. The crops began to grow. Tiny green shoots pushed through the soil, bending in the wind, and slowly the valley began to look alive again. Daniel felt a sense of pride he had never experienced before, but more importantly, he felt joy. This joy came not from the prospect of profit or recognition, but from seeing the land awaken and seeing Nayeli's spirit come alive again. She laughed more now, a soft musical sound that made Daniel feel as though the valley itself was smiling. Their progress did not go unnoticed. Neighbors who had once mocked Daniel for buying worthless land began to take notice. Some whispered about the unusual partnership between a man and a mysterious Apache woman, unsure of how to feel. Others simply watched from afar, curious about how life had returned to a place everyone had given up on. Daniel did not care about the gossip. He had seen Nayeli's strength, her knowledge, and her courage. She had survived alone for years, and now together they were creating something that would last. But not every day was easy. One afternoon, a group of men from the town came by, eyeing the fields and the cabin. "You know, Daniel," one said, "people are talking. They say there's a woman living here. Are you sure this is a good idea?" Daniel's jaw tightened. He could have lied or ignored them, but he stood firm. "She has every right to be here. This land is ours now, and she is part of it," he said. The men left with muttered words, but Daniel knew that he had defended not just the land, but the dignity of the woman who had trusted him. Nayeli, watching from the cabin doorway, felt something shift inside her. For the first time in years, someone had stood for her without judgment or fear. Life on the valley continued. Nayeli taught Daniel about wild plants, how to use herbs for medicine, and where to find clean water even in dry months. She showed him hidden corners of the land where seeds from generations ago still slept beneath the soil, waiting to grow. Daniel absorbed it all, learning not just to farm, but to understand the land in a way he had never imagined. In turn, he showed Nayeli the practical side of planting crops, using tools and caring for animals. Together, they created a rhythm, a balance between old knowledge and new techniques. As the months passed, Daniel and Nayeli began to talk about the future. They planned which crops to plant next, how to build stronger fences, and even imagined a small garden for visitors who might come seeking food or guidance. Nayeli began to open up about her hopes as well. She wanted to teach others about her people's traditions, the dances, the songs, and the respect for the earth that had been passed down through generations. Daniel listened, fascinated. He realized that the land was no longer just soil and plants, it was a place of history, culture, and memory, kept alive by Nayeli's knowledge and spirit. One afternoon, as they worked near the newly planted fields, a sudden windstorm blew through the valley. The sky darkened and the first drops of rain began to fall. Daniel and Nayeli rushed to cover the young plants and secure the cabin doors. They moved quickly, shouting over the wind, helping each other in ways that had become second nature. By the time the storm passed, the sun broke through the clouds, shining on wet earth and fresh green sprouts. They stood together, drenched but smiling. "The land forgives us," Nayeli said softly, brushing rain from her hair. Daniel nodded, realizing how much the valley had healed under their care, just as they had healed together. Evenings became their time to reflect. They would sit by the fire in the cabin, drinking warm tea and sharing stories. Nayeli spoke of her family, the valley, and the ancestors who had once walked these lands. Daniel shared his childhood, his dreams, and the struggles he had faced as a farmer. Through these stories, they learned more about each other, building trust, respect, and companionship. Laughter returned more frequently, a sound that had been absent from both their lives for too long. By the time the first harvest arrived, the valley was unrecognizable. Golden stalks swayed in the wind, the cabin stood proudly where the shack had once leaned, and small gardens flourished with vegetables and herbs. Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment, not just for himself but for Nayeli. She had found strength, dignity, and a home once more. And for Daniel, life had gained a richness he had never imagined. A partnership built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. The story of their work slowly spread through the town. Some were inspired, others skeptical, but all had to acknowledge that life had returned to a land everyone had abandoned. Daniel and Nayeli did not seek recognition. Their reward was the valley itself, alive, productive, and filled with hope. For Daniel, the $1 purchase had been far more than a bargain. It had been a gateway to friendship, understanding, and a deeper appreciation for life. For Nayeli, the land had become more than a refuge. It had become a place of rebirth, a safe space to reclaim what had been lost and to build a future alongside someone who truly respected her. And as the sun set behind the mountains, casting a golden light across the valley, Daniel looked at Nayeli tending the garden and realized that together, they had not only restored the land, but they had restored something much deeper: trust, hope, and the quiet joy of life shared in harmony. This was the true reward of the abandoned land, a story of survival, courage, and the unexpected power of partnership. Daniel and Nayeli stood together on the hill overlooking the valley. The land, once dry, empty, and forgotten, now shimmered with life. Golden fields of wheat swayed in the gentle breeze, rows of vegetables grew healthy and strong, and the small cabin they had built together stood proud at the edge of the property. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the sweet scent of earth, grass, and growing crops. He remembered the day he had bought this land for just $1 and could hardly believe how far they had come. But more than the land itself, it was Nayeli's presence that had made everything possible. She had transformed the valley as much as he had. Nayeli, once shy and cautious, now moved freely through the fields. Her hands, strong and confident, guided seedlings into the ground, adjusted irrigation channels, and tended herbs with skill that came from generations of knowledge. She smiled often now, a soft, luminous smile that seemed to make the valley itself glow. Daniel watched her, amazed at her resilience, her courage, and her ability to heal not only herself but the land around her. They had both found something unexpected, a purpose that went beyond survival, a connection that went deeper than words. Their neighbors began to notice the transformation. Farmers who had once laughed at Daniel's $1 purchase now came to ask questions. Children ran through the fields, marveling at the healthy crops and the beauty of the land. Visitors arrived quietly, curious about the partnership between the farmer and the Apache woman who had lived in hiding. Daniel and Nayeli welcomed them, showing how the land had been restored, how crops could flourish even in places people had written off as useless. But more importantly, they shared the story of trust, patience, and partnership that had brought the valley back to life. Life in the valley became a rhythm, predictable yet full of joy. Daniel rose with the sun, checking the crops, repairing fences, and preparing meals. Nayeli worked beside him, teaching, guiding, and sharing her knowledge of plants, soil, and water. They had established a balance, a harmony that grew stronger every day. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire in the cabin, reflecting on their day, sharing stories, and planning for the next. Sometimes they would laugh at small mistakes. the fence that fell, the irrigation that overflowed, but mostly they found quiet satisfaction in their achievements. As the seasons changed, the valley showed new signs of life. Birds returned to the trees, rabbits and deer wandered through the fields, and wildflowers appeared along the edges of the property. The soil, once dry and cracked, was now rich and fertile. Naeli taught Daniel how to save seeds for the next season, how to protect the plants from pests without chemicals, and how to use herbs for simple remedies. Daniel marveled at her knowledge, realizing that the land was alive not just because of hard work, but because she had nurtured it with understanding and respect. Daniel also noticed changes within himself. He had come to the valley seeking opportunity, perhaps even a fresh start, but he had found much more than that. Naeli had opened his eyes to the history of the land, to the struggles of the people who had once lived there, and to the quiet power of resilience and care. He realized that the $1 investment had been nothing compared to the value of the friendship, trust, and partnership he had discovered. Naeli had been surviving alone for years, hidden and hungry, and yet she had carried a knowledge and a dignity that inspired him every day. One afternoon, while planting a new row of vegetables, Daniel turned to Naeli. "Do you ever think about leaving?" he asked softly. She shook her head, looking around at the fields, the cabin, and the distant hills. "This is my home," she said. "Here I am not alone. Here the land remembers my people." Daniel nodded, understanding more deeply than ever that this land was more than soil and crops. It was memory, history, and life. It had given Naeli a place to belong and had given him a chance to see the world differently, through eyes that had endured hardship and still held hope. The harvest came, and it was a moment of celebration. Together, Daniel and Naeli gathered the fruits of their labor. The wheat, golden and abundant, swayed under their careful hands. Vegetables were gathered and sorted, some shared with neighbors, some saved for the next planting season. Children ran through the fields laughing and playing, while adults marveled at how much life had returned to the valley. Daniel realized that this harvest was more than crops. It was the reward of trust, partnership, and determination. Naeli smiled as they worked together, her eyes shining with pride. Over time, their story spread beyond the valley. People came to hear how Daniel had bought land for $1 and found a hidden woman living in the shack. But the story that impressed them most was not the dollar, the land, or even the crops. It was the quiet, enduring partnership between two people from different worlds who had come together to restore life where it had almost been lost. Daniel and Naeli did not seek recognition. Their joy was in the valley itself, in the wind through the fields, in the rich soil under their hands, and in the knowledge that they had created something lasting. As years passed, the cabin became a home in every sense of the word. It was warm in the winter, filled with the smell of cooking, the laughter of friends and neighbors, and the quiet comfort of shared work. Daniel and Naeli continued to nurture the land, always learning, always listening. They planted new trees, expanded the gardens, and even built a small area for animals, restoring the valley's ecosystem in ways no one had expected. Daniel often paused to watch Naeli in the fields, thinking of how far she had come from the frightened, starving woman he had first found hiding in the shack. And he knew that together they had not only restored the land, they had restored each other's lives. At sunset, when the sky turned golden and the wind rustled through the crops, Daniel and Naeli would stand side by side looking at the valley they had nurtured. The land that had been abandoned, overlooked, and forgotten now thrived, full of life and hope. Daniel smiled at Naeli, grateful for her wisdom, her courage, and her trust. Naeli looked back at him, her eyes reflecting the fading sun, and smiled too. A smile of gratitude, resilience, and the quiet joy of a new beginning. The valley was alive again, and so were they. Their story became a quiet legend in the region, a tale of hope, courage, and the power of partnership. Daniel often thought about that $1 purchase and how it had led to everything. A thriving valley, a strong community, and a friendship that had grown into something deeper and enduring. Naeli, once hidden and alone, had found a place to belong, to heal, and to share her knowledge with the world. Together they had proven that even the smallest spark, a dollar, a chance, a moment of trust, could ignite change, bring life, and restore hope where it had been lost. In the end, the valley was more than land. It was a home, a story, and a testament to the courage of two people who refused to give up. Daniel and Nayeli had discovered that the true value of the land was not in money or profit, but in the life it could give, the lessons it could teach, and the bond it could create. The abandoned land, bought for $1, had become a place of miracles, proving that hope, trust, and care could transform not only the earth, but the hearts of those who worked it.